A beginning is a very delicate time. Know then that it is the year 10,191. The known universe is ruled by the Padishah Emperor Shaddam IV, my father. In this time, the most precious substance in the universe is the spice melange. The spice extends life. The spice expands consciousness. The spice is vital to space travel. The Spacing Guild and its navigators, who the spice has mutated over 4,000 years, use the orange spice gas, which gives them the ability to fold space. That is, travel to any part of the universe without moving. Oh yes, I forgot to tell you. The spice exists on only one planet in the entire universe. A desolate, dry planet with vast deserts. Hidden away within the rocks of these deserts are a people known as the Fremen, who have long held a prophecy that a man would come, a Messiah, who would lead them to true freedom. The planet is Arrakis, also known as Dune.
Welcome to Frame Rate, our movie review podcast via Patreon, but we're making it public for everyone who follows Perfect Organism and Shoal of Orion, the Blade Runner podcast. I'm joined here by...
Patrick, my friend, Jamie.
Oh yeah, I'm Jamie. And we are here to talk about David Lynch's Dune. I've been a fan for a long, long time. I think it came out in 1984.
84, right?
84,
yeah.
Yes. And yeah, I've been a fan of this film a long time. Patrick, you've seen it, but you just recently watched it again because it had been a while for you. I watch it quite often. I have the metal box set. I think there's 4 discs in there. I love the film. I'm fairly aware and fully aware of many of its issues. But I thought, in light of Denis Villeneuve's Dune that's coming out at the end of this year, we should talk about this movie and talk about where Dune is with us and where it has been on our radar, and if it's a film that you've thought about, or a story, or a book. Have you read the books? Stuff like that. So thanks for joining us, everybody, and we are going to start talking about it.
Let's start. Yeah, this is one that I've been kind of unsure of how to broach, because this is a movie that I have a hard time sort of penetrating in a way. Ooh. Like this is came out sexual. You know what else is sexual? I have to say, for those of you listening, is we just moved. My family and I moved, and we finally have functional internet, and so I feel like our connection right now is so freaking good. And I'm getting like genuine pleasure from that. So that's my other little thing. So I feel like Dune is a property that has always interested me. I have never read any of the novels. I own the first one. I got a hardback edition of it to read, and it is the only book that is not packed away in a suitcase still right now, because it's something that I'm going to be getting to very shortly. I've always been fascinated by it. The film itself, I had never actually seen the entire thing, although I had assumed that I had. But as I mentioned to you this morning, in rewatching it, I was like, oh man, there's stuff in here that I don't think I've ever actually seen before. So I think that this viewing the last 2 days was the first time I've seen the entire thing from the very beginning until the very end. And it's also the first time I've watched any of it in probably a decade, something like that. And I personally... I have a very hard time connecting with this movie, but I do not have a hard time connecting with the ideas underpinning it, which makes me think that Denis Villeneuve's film is probably going to blow my fucking head off, and I'm going to be very excited about it, and the novel will as well. But you have always had a different connection with this movie. It's come up before as something that you're into. I know you're a big Krull fan. It's kind of a similar era, similar aesthetics, some similar creative team. And we've also discussed Dune quite a bit in the context of the Jodorowsky failed, project, which to me is it's one of my like big sort of cinephile, amazements. It's something that I've always been so fascinated by. But can you give us a little bit of insight into your relationship with the 1984 movie and kind of and what you see in it that I might not?
Well, I remember seeing Dune as a young kid in the commune that I grew up with, and of course, in this commune, was always sort of steeped in religious mythology and Jesus and like being the chosen one, Moses, all of those things. So those types of stories, whether it's stories like Superman or even Star Wars, where you have Luke Skywalker coming out of the desert to sort of lead his people or be the
Matrix.
hero. Matrix for sure, but that's much later. The story of Dune has always felt personal to me. I think there's a couple things happening for me in terms of Dune. There's the story, there's the movie, which I really love it. I love it for its aesthetics. I think it's beautiful. The architecture, the art direction, the costuming. I mean, it's second to none. I've never seen a movie in some ways that beautiful before. I think it's absolutely stunning. I love the idea of this sort of savior, the savior coming out of, I mean, we'll get into the story, but this savior rising up and essentially he's Moses. He's sort of Jesus. He's freeing his people. But within this savior story, you have sorcery, like the Bene Gesserits and their witch's tongue, and you have the Spacing Guild and these monstrous things that fold space, and they run these spaceships, and there's so much going on in this world. And you have this big fat baron, Donald Trump, in a baron.
It's Trump in a gravity suit, right?
Yeah. Baron Harkonnen off in his own world, and then you have the Fremen, which live on Arrakis, and then you have the Emperor Shaddam IV. And there's so much going on. It's so heady. It's so layered. There's so much happening. Now, I think, do I love this film? Yes. Do I think it's probably a little ridiculous? Absolutely. Is it a masterpiece? Never. Is it full of tons of problems? Sure. Absolutely. I think what speaks to me about Dune is there's this power behind it. There's this power to Kyle MacLachlan's performance. I love him in this movie. I think he is
It was his first role.
First big role, yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
He's very over the top. I mean, he's over the top. He is ridiculous. Father, like the sleeper has a weight. Like, it's over the top. Now, he was also directed by David Lynch, so maybe that's
I was going to say it's a David Lynch movie, right? Everybody's like that.
But what's interesting, though, is Lynch is not an over-the-top director. He's a very quiet, understated director. So this was a very interesting film for him. I mean, he won't even talk about it anymore, which is, it's like his Alien 3. And this is the same director who directed The Elephant Man, which me and a friend are doing a frame rate on. We'll be releasing at some point. So you have the director of Elephant Man and Blue Velvet and so many movies, so many avant-garde art house films, directing this huge, over-the-top, corny, cheesy sci-fi. So it's kind of like, where was David Lynch in this? Where was his head in this? I mean, he left, like, he sort of dropped his name from the project. He sort of walked away from it. But I feel like it is a worthy film. And, of course, who also does it star as Sean Young, who was fresh off Blade Runner from this role. Blade Runner had released 2 years before, so she went right into filming for Dune. And I feel like there's a lot to discuss, and there's a lot happening in the story where you have this esteemed family coming to take over this guild, this planet where the spice is mined, where everyone uses a spice to fold space, to change their lives, all of these things, and this family is going to take over it, and there's this other family, this sinister family, who has other plans, and they devise their own plot, and war breaks out. And you think it's all over for House Atreides, but it's not, and then
Jesus is coming.
Yeah, but even still, he has his own journey. Paul Atreides played by Kyle MacLachlan, he has his own journey that he's coming from. He's this young kid, essentially sort of untested. He's being trained by all the right people, and then he's thrust into this world where he has to either step up or step back, and he chooses to step up. And I think it's a really phenomenal thing.
No. You. No.
Some strength there. Surprising.
What is interesting about this movie, there's a lot that's interesting about this movie. One of them, I think, is specifically David Lynch, because there are moments in the film where you can kind of see him poking through. But I agree that on the whole, and I say this as a very big Lynch fan, I don't see very much of him in this movie. I see in some of the weirdnesses, I see him. In some of the way that shots are framed, I can see his hand there. But it feels almost too for a film that takes as many liberties with the source material. It feels very slavish to the idea that it's based on a book, and I think it's no accident that this is probably Lynch's first novel adaptation. I would imagine this is the first one that he did, because a lot of the things that happen in novels, like characters having inner monologues that are just sort of the amount of times in this movie where somebody kind of just like holds a look and then has an inner like, well, I can't believe he's going to do this if that's what he really thought he was going to say, and it's echoing in their head. They're very kind of novel tropes that I think really slow the pace down, and not in a way that's interesting. Denis Villeneuve is somebody who knows how to slow pace down for dramatic effect, right? Like, his films are slow because they kind of have to be, because they give you room to inject yourself and to experience it. Dune, 84 Dune, is slow, I think, because it's a little bit constipated, because there are a lot of things that it gets kind of hung up on making sure that everybody understands, but in doing so, overcomplicates what at its heart is actually like such a fucking simple story. And that's the thing. Dune is the best-selling science fiction novel of all time. He always says that, right? If the novel itself were as hard to comprehend as the movie is, I don't think people would be reading it this much. I think the movie, in trying to go so deep into the different layers of the order of, the House of Atreides and House Harkonnen, and into the, the different cultural artifacts that the Fremen have, and into the, Arrakis ecology, and into all these different things that it kind of spends a lot of time literally telling us about, because it's exposition. It's just characters turning to the screen and talking about a lot of the time. If it kind of just like allowed that stuff to become symbolic, and allowed that stuff to just sort of happen, allowed the mentats to not be so distracting, allowed a lot of these things to just sort of like fade into the experience of watching the movie, I think it would be a better film. I think it's trying too hard to be a novel. That said, I think the production design, I agree with you, the production design, the costume design for this film is out of control good. It is just extraordinarily beautiful. I think that the, what's Cyan Phillips' character's name? The witch mother?
Gaius Helen Mohiam?
Yes. Her costuming is like, that's one of the most amazing outfits I've seen in a film in my life. Yeah. I mean, it's just, and the fact that you had this just extraordinary list of some of the best, especially European character actors of the middle 20th century in this film. It's an astounding cast, and it has a lot going for it. And also, Toto's soundtrack is awesome. I think it's instantly recognizable. It's unique, and it's kind of hypnotic without being without droning. It's a very hypnotic score. I think it has a lot going for it. It's just, I think in its execution and the way it came together, it feels like it was trying to be a book on screen. And you don't want that to happen. If you're making a film based on a book, you take the story from the book and you liberate it, right? You don't make sure that you cover every single period on the page. And in Dune, to me, that's kind of part of what holds it back, personally.
Yeah, and I think that it really lacks context. Now, there is a longer cut they use imagery to sort of tell the story of the Bene Gesserits and House Atreides and why they are and who they are, and they use all these images, and that cut is somewhere available. I don't know available, but it's somewhere. They played it on TV once. Actually, I think the box set that I have has that cut, wherever that box set is. But I think, yes, the film suffers from, I think the inner monologues just suffocate the film. I think instead of there's a scene where in the beginning, Paul is being trained by
Patrick Stewart.
Patrick Stewart's character is like, oh, what's wrong with him? He seems angry. Everything's
right, exactly.
like, oh, what is he like?
Especially with Paul, who has to fucking tell us everything, not only that he's observing, but everything he's dreaming about, as he's also dreaming about. I'm like, what the fuck, David Lynch? Back off a little bit.
Yeah, it
right?
was so expositional in almost every frame, and it was, you could, I don't know, see, I do love the film, but I don't know tons about it, actually. I don't know if maybe some of that, much like Blade Runner, some of that inner monologue was like the studio's like, no, you got to explain this stuff. This is not clear. You got to.
I bet a lot of it was because Lynch, like you said, removed his name from the film in subsequent cuts of it. He did not have final cut privileges. He basically exited, before it was finally printed. So I'm sure a lot of this was the studio trying to cover their asses and feeling like they had something that audiences weren't capable of understanding, which is crazy because it was the one time in fucking film history when there's a really good chance the audiences would understand something, right? Yeah. This was mid-1980s science fiction. This is when you could throw anything at the screen and you would have an audience there who was like capable of getting into it. I mean, they were bombarded by amazing idea-based science fiction in the mid-1980s. Yeah. And for whatever reason, the producers of Dune didn't trust people, I don't think. Yeah,
they didn't trust people, and I think that was very interesting. Although I think about films like Blade Runner, who, the original cut had the voiceover, and of course it's very controversial whether that's effective or whether it takes away from the film. But I think also studios were like, this might be too highbrow, might be too high concept for audiences, so they dumbed it down so that people could understand it. At least that's what the interpretation was. And I think, Dune has been called Dune has been called unfilmable. It's an unfilmable book. And so, but then there's a different version of Dune that the Sci-Fi Channel released in the early 2000s. And
2003.
I think it's a 6-hour miniseries. Yeah. And then they did Children of Dune, which was another 6-hour miniseries. And far more faithful, but unfortunately the acting was really subpar. The casting wasn't great. And the costumes looked ridiculous. I mean, you could tell it was a Sci-Fi Channel and they don't have big budgets. And you have to have a big budget with Dune, and it was just very obvious. And people will say, yes, it was more faithful to the book, but it was kind of boring, and it really was. Whereas with Lynch's film, it was the opposite, where it was less faithful, but it had a bigger budget, so it was more visually interesting. I think the story of Dune is a story that has been told before in different versions, whether it's coming out of religious ideology or mythology like Moses, like Jesus, and then you have different iterations of those Jesus and Moses stories, like Superman, like The Matrix, like Dune, which was written and released in 1965. Star Wars was released in 77. All of them finding or trading in similar stock, where you have this young boy, this young man rising up to lead his people.
And it's always a man. It's always a fucking young man.
It is always a man. It is. I think if you look at religious mythology, it is always a man there too.
It is always a man. But in Dune, there's this. It's funny, when I was watching it, yesterday, I was noticing things in the script that I didn't notice when I was watching it when I was basically a kid, which were like, so Paul is the only son, right? And he was basically born because the king's mistress or whatever, his concubine, disobeyed him and gave birth to a son.
Disobeyed her order, her Bene Gesserit order. They said to only bear daughters, and she decided she was going to bear him a son.
Right, and what happens with this one son that ends up being born is he's literally the Messiah. Like, thank God he got a pair of balls and a dick, because like now we can save the known universe by becoming the super being, right? And it's funny because the story, like you're saying, is actually on its face, if you strip away all of the world building around it, is just really, really straightforward. It's basically like a trade war. It's basically the Promised Land, right? You have two factions of people, whether it be the Israelites and the Egyptians or whatever, or whether it be Harkonnen and Atreides. You have two houses fighting over the same land, right? The same resources, or however you want to define that. Who are basically the only way that the conflict is eliminated is when a savior can rise up and basically supersede conflict and show people peace through battle, right? And I feel like it's just weird that the movie makes it seem so much harder to understand than that. But I do think that there are moments in it that are like just really, really extraordinary. Like the Guild, like their shots when they're coming out of that enormous, spaceship that can fold space with the
vagina
giant
mouth.
the vagina, yeah, with the flesh to
which I thought was ridiculous, to be honest with you. I thought, come on.
And those are mutated people, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
It also looks a lot like the creature from Eraserhead, if you've seen Eraserhead.
It does a lot, yeah. Like
very similar architecture going on there.
Yeah, I agree. Like those shots are amazing. I think that like the interiors of the House of Atreides with the those giant sets are just incredible. And I think that the sand dunes themselves are really beautifully shot. I think that the worms are just incredible. The sense of scale, like that first time when they're flying, over with Max von Sydow, who again, like just one of many actors in this thing who's just incredible. And they see the worm for the first time rising up to grab the vessel out of the sand. It really feels like a 400-meter creature. It doesn't feel like a miniature. The effects in this movie are really astounding. And again, it goes to show you that in the mid-1980s, it almost didn't matter what story you had. If you had a film that had an effects budget, you could create spectacle that people would go and see, And I feel like the amount of spectacle in this film is just astounding.
Try looking into that place where you dare not look. You will find me there staring back at you.
You mustn't speak!
I think that the effects, they can be great, but also they can be really shitty. Like there's a scene where Paul and his mother are on the rocks, and they've flown out of where they were supposed to be with the palace, and they're falling on the rocks, and you see them, and you can tell, and it's blue screen behind them.
The screen, I know. Again, I feel like blue screen or green screen, that is the one thing in mid-1980s films where they, like in Aliens, this is an issue quite a bit too, where like they did not composite it well enough. Right? Like in the dropship and Aliens, it's like, oh man, like it looks so great until this one shot.
Yeah, it looks pretty good, although it's funny because the compositing in Alien 3 was worse than Aliens for whatever
in
reason.
A couple of sequences, yeah, definitely.
And quite a few sequences. However, I do think, but then there's a scene where they get on the worms in Dune, and it's clearly a blue screen behind them, and you can just see the lines. But on the whole, I think the effects were pretty great. The scale, the design of the ships, the stilt suits, the Bene Gesserits, the palace, the dresses, and you could see that they pulled from some elements of human history because it is our history much further in the future, but at the same time it felt wholly alien and very foreign. It did not seem identifiable to us to think, oh, look, it's like Queen Elizabeth, but it wasn't. Yes, they had larger dresses, but it wasn't. And I love the look of the Bene Gesserits. I love that it's like this sisterhood, they're almost like nuns, but they're powerful. They're some of the most powerful beings in the universe because of what they can do and their powers of procreation and the voice that they use. And people are a little afraid of the Bene Gesserits, which I think is interesting, because I think they're sort of balance out this idea that the Kwisatz Haderach was a man, but it might not necessarily could have been a man. It could have been a woman. But who had the power to bring that person to life? A woman. And they knew it. They knew that they were the order that this supreme being was going to come from. So I feel like, yes, it's a story about, I don't feel like it's a story about a man saving a group of people or a nation. I feel like it's a story of a people rising up together with this foreigner and him showing them how to topple then you have the whole like Fern Gully, like, do they need,
right, Elysium, right?
Yeah, and that that can be problematic too. But I think I think for a long time, and there's still elements of it in terms of like white savior coming to save. However, in Dune, most of the Fremen are white. It's not like white man comes in.
They're white, but they're clearly like minority. Like they're clearly like other, right? They're
like the Irish or something. Yeah.
Yes, right. Yeah, they're not like. And they're looked down upon. People like
took a prince to save them. Yes.
Right. And in addition to there being like the only son who becomes the savior of these people, he also rides a giant dick into battle.
That's true too.
To be fair, there's something going on there. There's also a weird, so when Harkonnen kills that boy in the first time you see him, like, what the fuck is going on with that sequence?
Weird. It's like they didn't want to show what they were doing, but he pulls out his heart plug, and so he's bleeding. And in the book, it describes Baron Harkonnen's predilection for young boys. He's a monster, but they don't really. But then you see Sting coming out in his metal bikini, and he's Sting's is Harkonnen's nephew, but you see right? the Baron looking at him very much like what I could do with him, what I could do to him. So there's this sort of incestuous lust happening between the Baron Harkonnen and what's Sting's character? Fade Rautha, that's his name. So it's interesting. It's gross. It's dirty. It is
gross, and I don't think
I like it though. I mean,
I don't think it's intentionally kind of like besmirching like homosexuals.
No, not at all.
But I think, and for audiences in the mid 1980s, I could see it perhaps playing like that. And I saw one review where somebody pointed that sequence out, and I was thinking for people who might not have been used to seeing like same-sex sexual interactions on film before. The fact that like one of the first ones that they're seeing is this monstrous thing where this older man is just destroying this young boy. It's just
where they make it look disgusting. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, it's literally a fat, warty guy destroying a beautiful young boy. Basically, it's just like it plays on all of these different. So I'm sure that wasn't the intention. I can see that having been problematic at the time.
Yeah.
But I do think that the I can't remember his name, but the actor who plays Harkonnen does a really good job of selling the incredible grotesqueness of the role. Also, Brad Dourif is in this, which is so cool. Like this is one of the first films that I remember ever having seen him in, and I think he's terrific as that. Is it Mentat? How do they say it? Mentat. Mentat.
What's his name? His name is Piter.
Piter, yeah. Like really interesting job. And then also in terms of world building, the reason why they even have those mentats in the first place, right, is because computers are outlawed. And so there's a reason why I think it seems a little bit like alien future. Like, so for example, I talk about Fury Road all the time, which how the fuck have we not done that frame rate yet? Because that's a movie. Yeah. I could talk about that all night long, any day of the week. I like to bring that up in the context of in a terrestrial, like an earthbound environment that isn't completely different from the one that we're inhabiting now, but feels like a completely different, it's like inhabited by different species, even though it's just us in different circumstances. I feel like the idea that computers are outlawed sets up a context for Dune that allows for similar things to happen because they're not as overtly technological as you would expect them to be. Like they are, right? Like they have amazing machinery, but they're not a bunch of like, sort of cerebral superhumans kind of levitating around, doing whatever they want. They're in a lot of ways kind of like biblical, right? They're like these old Shakespearean houses of, lords and ladies who are, using, basically just doing extractive industry mining on a desert planet, right?
Well, I think you're hitting on a very important thing, and what sets Dune apart so much from other science fiction. It's not the lack of technology; it's the lack of most science fiction films. It's screens. It's this. It's oh, look at this screen here. It's projection.
Right. Exactly.
It's what do you call those 3D models that are holograms?
Holograms. Yeah.
Holograms. There's everything. There's tablets. There's this and there's that. Where it does feel almost like fantasy. Yes, they're technologically advanced, but it's more organic, where we've learned to pilot in space by taking substances that alter our understanding of what space is and what space can do. And that then changes us, and then it gives whoever the guild are part of the Spacing Guild powers that are unnatural, but they've harnessed them, and that they can. But it's come at a cost. It's come at the cost of their bodies and their minds. And
I find that aspect super freaky. I
do too.
The navigators, like that's fucking scary. The fact that they just live in tanks of misty, spice, like I find that super freaky. And especially in some of the Dune novels, I know that there's other things with people becoming worms and things like that. Like that shit scares me a lot.
Yeah. With most science fiction, you see a lot of attention paid to the technology. That's sort of a part of the genre. even in Blade Runner, it's prevalent in the genre. They don't focus on it too much. You see people just using stuff as if it's everyday. Oftentimes, even in bad sci-fi, there's all this attention paid to technology, where science fiction isn't about technology. It's about the questions. It's about the larger philosophy. That's really what good science fiction's about. And I think what makes David Lynch's Dune so amazing is there's no focus at all. There's not just not focus on the technology. There's not even a shot looking at like this screen or that screen. It's just happening. And it's really unique. Again, I don't think the film is successful. I think it's got a cult following. A lot of people love it because it's cheesy, but it's something that was like a world. They promoted the film as a world beyond your imagination. And it really is.
There are whole stretches in that movie that would fit that category. Oh yeah. 100%.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Where you're just sort of like, jaws on the floor, and then something so stupid happens, or something such a poor decision is made.
Or then you get an actor who's just like the other Fade Routha's brother, who I can't remember his name,
but the other nephew.
He was the big one,
right?
That actor was just ridiculous. He was a terrible actor, just like just over the top. And there was,
but again, though, I do wonder if that was part. I'm sorry, I'm cutting you off. I'm cutting you off because our connection is good enough that I can do that now.
I know.
So people are going to fucking write in and complain about this. But see, even so, with the nephew, his Fade's brother, like to me, that is more of like a Lynchian character, which is I think is why it kind of sticks out. In Twin Peaks, for example, there's a lot of characters who act like they walked in from another movie and happen to be in this one. And are just sort of reading the lines and they kind of go off back into another movie. You know what I mean? It's very Lynchian, I think, to just sort of have this like, it's like a character who exists purely within its own relativistic universe. Mm-hmm. And you know what I mean? And I think like that there's something to be said for like bad acting, quote unquote, working well in Lynch films. In this one, the bad acting is just bad acting. And I think it's because he didn't have control over some of the aesthetic considerations around, I mean, like there are moments in Lynch's filmography that I think are some of the most amazing things ever put to film. I really think some of his what he's done, especially in terms of like imagery that can get under your skin, is just like it's like he has some sort of a finger on the pulse of God or something. It's fucking amazing. In Dune, though, his finger wasn't on the pulse enough to reveal it. It was just sort of on the pulse enough to make you like aware that he was involved, I think.
Yeah, and I think just to wrap up the acting portion of this discussion, the acting is all over the place. I think even there's moments where Sting is sort of like over the top. I will kill him. And he's jumping up and down, and you see these character moments, but you haven't been introduced to any other character moments before. So it's, at least with Paul sort of the same over the top savior from the beginning. Even when he's in his own thoughts, he's very over the top. So at least he was, he stayed true to who he was. And then the most notable character, some notable female characters like Chani, played by Sean Young, she was sort of relegated to this kind of damsel in distress. She seemed powerful in the beginning, but she's just sort of then became his love interest. And she was a non-character. And I don't know how much of her character is on the cutting room floor, because I hear that there's hours of
well, it was
footage.
4 hours, right? The first cut of it was 4 hours long.
Something like that, but I think that's myth. I don't know how true that is. People say that, there's a 4-hour cut somewhere. I don't know if that's true. It could be for sure. But then you have even Jessica, who I thought was a great character in the beginning, and she has prominence. She's then becomes the Reverend Mother, and she sort of disappears from the movie. She's just quiet, and it's unfortunate that so many of the female characters are sort of nothing by the end of the film, and it's this film about men. And then you have other interesting characters like the Shadette Mapes, played by that one actress. Oh my God, I can't remember her name. Oh, I see her name right now.
Linda Hunt.
Linda Hunt, yes.
Fucking awesome actress.
She's amazing.
She won an Academy Award too.
Yep, yeah. She's amazing. And I thought the Shadette Mapes could have been a great character, and you see her introduced, I am the Shadette Mapes housekeeper, and then she's killed. And
after how long? Maybe 1 minute. I remember her being in that movie for some reason. I think because she's just a great actress. So whenever I see her in something, I'm like, oh, this is like Lynn Hunt. Yeah. She's in that movie for 3 minutes. It's so short.
Yeah.
What about Duck in Idaho? Do you like him?
Duncan is played by, that one actor. I did, but again, Duncan gets killed right away.
I know. So in the books, supposedly he's like a huge deal, right? Like he's like a fan favorite character who comes back, and all these things. And in the movie, I thought that actor was really good. He reminds me a lot of Marlon Brando visually. He looks a lot like Marlon Brando.
Yeah, sort of. Marlon Brando was better looking, but I can see the comparison.
Yeah, but there's like a resemblance, I think. And then again, he's like so underutilized in this movie because they're just sort of churning through shit,
Yeah.
And
even go ahead.
Well, even Sean Young's character, like who is foretold in visions for fucking an hour and a half, shows up like 3/4 of the way into the movie.
And then dream so beautiful.
Right, and then she just and then it turns out that's actually all she was there for. Was basically
that's the strange thing,
right?
Yeah, it's like from my dream, she's so beautiful. Like that's it. That's all she is. She's not intelligent. She's not. Yeah, right. I mean, the movie does a fairly big disservice to the female characters, but I also think the movie doesn't really know what it is. I think that movie is incoherent in some ways. Even the longer cut that they did premiere, I think it was a 2.5 hour, 3 hour cut on TV, which explained a lot of the history of Dune. It worked a little bit better, but all those images were just static, and they were doing the Ken Burns thing from sort of image to image. But I think that the movie is just incoherent. What I do love, like some of my favorite parts of the film, or towards the end when Paul has assumed the role of the Kwisatz Haderach, and he has embraced the power, and he screams at the end without the weirding module, and the earth breaks apart, and people are like shocked that this man is this powerful. And they said Paul had become the right hand of God. I love that moment, and then it starts raining. There's a biblical quality to the film that I really, really love, and it keeps me coming back. The idea that we, maybe even in our own way in real life, there's some type of mythology at work with us. I don't know what that mythology might be. For some of us, it might be involve the religious. For some others, it's more of a poetic mythology that's happening to the world. But I love tapping into the mythology, and I think when it works, it really works. I don't think that that's very often, but I definitely think it's worth seeing, even if you're just going to see it for the costume design and the set design. I mean, all the wood. Oh yeah, it's beautiful.
It's similar to Prometheus in that respect, I think.
Oh yeah,
it's a movie that
it's better than Prometheus, but yeah.
For some people, I agree. For some people, it will really speak to you, right? Like just like there are some of our friends for whom Prometheus is just like the greatest thing they've ever seen.
2 of them. Mm-hmm.
For like 2 of our friends, both suffered tremendous brain damage. For a lot of I know people who think Dune is just like the greatest movie ever, and they're just completely obsessed with it. I think it speaks to like certain types of film goers with certain types of expectations, and I think for everybody else, it's really a curiosity. Prometheus, similarly, is a curiosity. It's extremely beautiful. It's so well made, but the script was like written on the back of toilet paper by a 5th grader, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Similarly, with Dune, it is like just an extraordinarily beautiful achievement. It has some of the best technical things, that the 1980s could have possibly brought. It's made by one of the great directors of the 20th century.
Yeah.
It has some of the most eminent actors, of the second half of the 20th century in it. It has a lot going for it, and yet it ends up not, to me, okay, so here's my issue with it. To me, it's not weird enough to do justice to the book, or at least from what I know of the book. Jodorowsky's version was so incredibly strange, for one thing, because it was Jodorowsky, who just loves to do avant-garde crazy shit, but also because he felt like the only way that book could be made into a film was to make a film that basically could explode people's notions of what a film could do, So one of my favorite composers of the early 20th century is this guy named Scriabin, who, do you know Scriabin? He was a Russian composer, died in the 1920s, very young. He's worth checking out. You would probably appreciate his music. I'll show you next time we visit. So Scriabin had this notion increasingly as his career went on, that the only way to write a symphony that could express what music actually could be, was to create a symphony that would basically obliterate what anybody thought a symphony could be. So he had this idea of basically making a pilgrimage to the top of this one specific mountain and having people come from all over the world wearing only certain types of colors of outfits and coming to the top of this thing where there would be an enormous light organ, literally he called it a light organ, that would basically cover the mountain peak with color that would explode when certain notes would be played, and that you would have an orchestra with thousands of people playing as loudly as they could on top of a mountain. And the idea would basically be to create a state of such ecstasy that there would be no going back, that would be the only way to do justice to what music actually could do.
Sounds like you're describing the scene in Close Encounters when the people are on the hillside, and they're singing,
with the signals.
And they put their hands up. Where'd they come from? But they're all singing on the mountainside, and some of them are wearing orange, some of them are wearing white.
It's a little bit like that. Yeah. It is a little bit like that visually, definitely. But the idea with Dune, as Jodorowsky saw it, was that the only way you could do justice to this book that was so much was basically to obliterate what people expected a movie to be. And that's why he had, Salvador Dali involved. That's why he had these crazy, crazy creative decisions going on, and why he assembled such an extraordinarily ambitious thing that was beyond unfilmable. I mean, it was like the most profoundly unfilmable thing anybody had ever taken seriously to a studio before, right? And with all of his pedigree and all of his endorsements and all of his power, he could not get that thing made. And I think with Lynch, studio executives probably thought, well, this is one of the only people who is artistically similar to Jodorowsky, and that he can kind of tap into this surrealistic, subconscious craziness that might get us something like what Jodorowsky was trying to do, but on a budget, which ended up was $42 million or something, right? Which is a lot of money back then. And then I think they didn't let him actually do what he wanted to do with it. I think if Lynch had made the movie that he wanted to make, we would be talking about it as one of the great films of its decade. I really think so. Instead, what we got was a still relatively young, early in his career director who, although he had all the power in the world and all the promise in the world and all of the endorsements, again, like Jodorowsky had 10 years before him, could not convince the studio to take enough of a chance to do it right. And what I really hope we see with Denis Villeneuve, and what I really think we will, because I think he is at a point where he has not only proved, obviously, that he's artistically extraordinary, but that he can turn a fucking profit on a movie, right? Even if it's not always like an enormous blockbuster profit, he can actually deliver on time and make money for studios. I hope we see that he is allowed to take the risks that he feels he needs to take to do justice to this extraordinarily ambitious work of art that is Dune. And, we are coming up on its 50th 60th anniversary, right? Like, I mean,
the book, yes.
Yeah. I mean, that's a huge deal.
Yeah. I think for me, at least in closing my thoughts, I think in terms of the Lynch film, what I feel like is the problem with this film is that they focused more attention on the look of it and less attention on the script. And you can tell it's beautiful, but it's incoherent. And that's where, and oftentimes in Hollywood, even on simpler films, especially in today's market, you have films that look really good, but are sort of like, yeah, okay, that wasn't really about anything, but it sure looked pretty. I mean, that's most of the films
like
these
Altered
days.
Carbon, right? Like,
yeah.
Great example.
Oh yeah, yeah. No, thank you. I actually watched all of that though. I'm just hoping that it would be good.
The second season?
No, I have no inclination to watch the second season. I think it's boring as fuck. I think it's lowbrow sci-fi, actually.
But it looks like highbrow sci-fi, and that is the
it
trap.
Doesn't really. You think it does, but then
it does for an episode. It does for long enough for you to be like, okay, this thing is like the real deal, but it's not.
But the problem with that is they think science fiction, like, oh, let's make this look cool, so they'll step out onto a balcony and you'll see, like, that's not science fiction. A cityscape that looks like the future, that doesn't make your movie science. Like, to me it just seemed like wildly sort of 80s, sort of wanted to be Blade Runner, sort of took inspiration from Blade Runner, but Blade Runner isn't an aesthetic. Blade Runner is a philosophy, which includes an aesthetic, and so you can't mix the two. It either is set or it isn't. Anyways, that's fodder for another discussion. But I really think that Lynch's Dune was mired by lack of attention to the script, but at the same time, probably also the idea that you can't fit this in a 2-hour movie. You just can't do it. And Villeneuve, we will discuss this film eventually when it comes out this year at some point. We're all excited about it. I think he realized that right away. He said, we're going to do this in 2 films. I bet you this first film's 3 hours long or close to it.
And I can't fucking wait to see it because seriously, this will be a movie. We'll probably have another fucking podcast by the time this year is over with. It's going to be so good, and I'll I'm about to read the book. I'm getting into it. I'm in the right headspace, and I look forward to exploring that with you and with all of you listening as we get closer to October. Right? It's supposed to come out
December 20th.
It's been pushed back, right?
No, it hasn't. It was
always December?
It was pushed back once, but that was last year it was pushed back. And it was supposed to open in November, then they moved it to September.
I was thinking of that. Okay.
Yeah,
well, good. Yeah. Okay. So we're on track. We'll see what happens with COVID. But
yeah, hopefully there'll be enough theaters open. I would imagine there will be by that time. I'm still hoping that they have opened enough theaters by July so that the new Nolan film can come out.
Tenet. Well, did you see the latest trailer for it?
I did. It looks great.
When it says coming to theaters, they make such a point of coming to theaters to make it really clear that that's happening. What's funny is we were just unpacking today, in our house, and I saw the ticket stub from Invisible Man that we'd seen in Quebec, and that's the last time I was in a movie theater.
Me too. For that same movie. Yeah.
And holy shit, that was so long ago.
It feels like 2 years ago to me.
I never go more than a couple of weeks without seeing a movie in theaters.
Yeah.
It's been months.
So bad. I miss them.
I know. So bad. So here's to hopefully getting back in theaters soon, and hope everybody's staying safe.
Yeah, we're excited. Thank you guys for listening. This was probably going to be part 1 of a series, not a series on Dune, but we're going to explore Dune again when the film comes out. We know we've been posting on it through Shoulder of Orion because we're big fans of Denis Villeneuve, and for now he's done no wrong. He's done mostly right. So I think hopefully he knocks this film out of the park. It's going to be interesting, especially with the track record for the people involved in this film, to see if he can get it right. So we'll see.
It's funny. The last thing I'll say is that now knowing who plays the characters in the new one, it's the first time obviously I've seen the old one since knowing who's playing the characters. And I'm like, this is going to be an interesting film.
We'll see if he can get Jason Momoa to actually act. I think Jason Momoa is fantastic, but he tends to play the same role over and over and over because that's sort of built for it. In a long hair, beard, like every character, he's this alpha male. Every single movie he's in or show, he's this crazy alpha male. So it's going to be interesting. I hope he's a little bit more subdued. I hope he can actually act. And
I'm excited to see it.
Me too.
All right.
Thanks, everybody.
See you guys.
Talk to you soon.
And how can this be? For he is the Kwisatz Haderach.
If you would like to listen to all of our reviews, go to www.bladerunnerpodcast.com/support and sign up to become a member. Our membership monthly subscriptions start at just $2 a month. For those of you who already support us via Patreon, we thank you.